Welcome back to Rise to Liberty podcast. Today we have a very special guest, a very harrowing story. First and foremost, this is a conversation that could be very, very triggering to some. And any of my recurring viewers or any of the new viewers, I don't use that word lightly. Of course, this is not a triggering as a liberal might use it. Somebody on the left. This is a conversation that actually could be very damaging to some, or those who are not very that don't want to hear very challenging and tough things. So I am just giving this forewarning that this is going to be an open and honest conversation about, for lack of a better term, evil. And if you believe that you cannot handle this conversation, or if you have suffered any sort of trauma in the past, and you are still struggling with these things, maybe this is an episode that you should probably skip. So just to give a fair warning, is there anything you would like to add to that, Jenny?
Well, so many people who have been victims of these types of crimes are in what we call cognitive dissonance anyway, that I always kind of trust that if somebody comes across this material and they're not ready to consciously hear it, they'll dissociate anyway. So right. I don't waste too much time worrying. And I trust too that people will be guided to these shows who need to hear them. Right. So that's kind of how I comfort myself, because I don't want to cause anybody pain.
Right. All right. Well, with that, we will get into it. So Jenny Marie Hatch, you are a mom, a podcaster and blogger. And would you like to just kind of give an intro to yourself? Who are you, and why should people be paying attention?
Well, 2 years ago, I made the decision to cover the Hamblin versus Utah case as a journalist. I watched the presser that David Levitt did, in which he claimed that a woman with a very similar background to mine was tragically mentally ill. He said this 5 times during his press conference. And it was in that moment that I said, I'm going to help these victims by sharing my own story, first and foremost, but also by just working as a journalist. There had been some good mainstream media coverage, especially from people like Adam Herbetz in Utah on Fox News. He was great. He did some wonderful reports. And there were many others who stepped up immediately to cover it. And I kind of joined that chorus. But over a series of weeks after the dueling press conferences with Sheriff Mike Smith and David Levitt, one by one, these journalists all stopped reporting. And when I received a cease and desist around my coverage of it, I had a decision to make. Am I going to keep going, or am I going to cease and desist covering the story? I decided to tell them to F off and just kept going. And I am so grateful for people like you and Goel at Investigations and Ritual Abuse and others who have been stalwart in covering the story, because I believe it is now completely underreported and it needs more coverage. It could use a crowdsourcing from people who are into true crime and really want to dig into the next big story. I would really encourage anybody listening to step into the fray and join us. When did you start covering this, Jacob? I didn't notice when you decided to take it on.
The very first time that I released a coverage of it on my Substack, which I will link below for anyone to go check out. It's just a basic overview of what had happened with these press conferences that Jenny had mentioned. It was probably just a couple of weeks after that first press conference.
Okay. Did you feel any terror around covering it yourself? Were you scared?
No, I actually, I feel a need to do it. I feel as though, I feel as though this is one of my callings. Yeah. a little bit of background beforehand. I had been covering, things like mind control, behavior modification. I have a major issue with the satanic panic narrative, the framing of a witch hunt of these things. Organizations such as the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, who is or was they're no longer an official organization, but their damage to everything. It's kind of what I was doing in the background, and then this story came out, and I had to jump on this immediately. Also, like you said, it is underreported.
Yeah.
And I think that is on purpose. I think it is for a reason. And so it was just one of the things I have to do. I feel as though I'm being called to do it.
I am too. And on days when I felt nervous and scared, I was more afraid of being killed than being sued. But now we are the people, Utah, being threatened with a lawsuit. We know Goel at Investigations and Ritual Abuse is being sued for stalking.
Yes.
Not the Hamlins, that family down in Spring City. What's their name? The artist.
The Benyons. Yeah,
the Benyons are claiming that him covering the story, acting as a journalist, is evidence of stalking. So we'll see where that goes. He's hilarious because he is fearless, and he's beating them in court right now. The courts aren't quite sure what to do, but that's been fun to follow. And then I read his most recent post yesterday. Did you see it?
I have seen it. I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
It was great because he shared how there are people high up in the church, like Shalom Levitt, who've been invited to come speak at conferences on sexual things. And then there's a former state president who's been invited to come give a fireside. And he's outed in the Hamblin victim statements as one of the worst. Right. And Goel just put ads for both events. And there are people in the comment section who said, let's go organize a protest. Because it's apparent that there are many people who are either ignorant about these things, they do not believe them, or they are in cognitive dissonance and they're not able to quite see the truth.
Right.
So, that's where it started for me. And then, as you said, I'm a victim of this stuff. And so I can give you like the 5-minute version of that if you want. I've done whole podcasts explaining my story. So people can go find those on my Substack, which is jennyhatch.substack.com.
Which is linked in the episode description. Yeah. There are some things that I'll have to add after, but just check the episode description. I will make sure that everything is linked over there. So one thing I would like to bring up. So you are LDS, correct? And you were raised in the LDS church, correct?
I consider myself third generation because although my parents joined the church when they were teenagers, my mom was 10 and my dad was 17 when they joined. Both sets of grandparents eventually joined and went to the temples. So I consider myself third generation. My dad was a full-time seminary teacher in Star Valley, Wyoming for 3 years. And my parents were all in with the gospel.
And was your family religious before, or?
Oh, yeah. My grandmother raised 7 children, my maternal grandmother, and she moved a lot because my grandfather was in the military. And so every time they moved to a new location, she would send the children to the church where they could walk that was closest to where their house was. It just so happened that when they moved to Riverside, California, the closest church was an LDS church. So that was the beginning for my mother.
And what decade were we talking about?
My mom was born in 1941. My dad was born in 1936. He joined the church because his older brother had joined and told him there were some really good looking girls at the local congregation. You should come check them out. So, well,
he's definitely not wrong. So there are very good looking people on both sides of that aisle. So I'm not sure if that's exclusive to the LDS church, but it is very true. Utah and surrounding states, I think, have very, very good looking people, all things considered.
Well, he grew up in Detroit, and so it was a small branch. in Detroit. Most of the members in Michigan have ties to the
Right.
West, and other things bring them to Detroit. But my dad's,
Right.
third generation Detroiter.
So yeah, let's go through, I guess, a quick synopsis. I do encourage any listener to go and find these episodes where Jenny does get into her story. They are a difficult listen, but in my opinion, I think it's a very necessary thing, especially if this is a topic that anyone plans on championing. If it's something that you would like to help the movement or anything, victim or survivor stories are I would say necessary, although I don't quite like that word. They are very important, so I would encourage anyone to go listen to that. And once again, it will be linked in the episode description. So,
well, these stories are important because as childhood victims, pretty much all we have is our memories. And especially if they're fuzzy or we were little children, pre-verbal children, all we have to go on are these nudges from our own minds with no evidence, almost no evidence. And so almost impossible to prosecute. And I think that's some of the problem with what you're seeing in this Hamblin case, that it was dismissed without prejudice, which means the judge said, hey, there's something here. And down the road, if more evidence comes forward, we'll open it back up. But for now, we just have to dismiss it. That's what happened to them. And then you had a couple of more victims show up in the form of Tobias Schroeder and Emily Sheets, who claim that David Hamblin messed with them in a most disgusting way. And so they reopened the case. And it's been incredible watching how the machine, the legal machine in Utah has bent over backwards not to prosecute David Hamblin and his former wife, Roselle. So that's been horrifying for me as a victim to watch, because when we heard they were arrested, we're thinking, oh man, we're going to be in court next week and we're going to get a conviction and that's it. It's been it's going on 3 years. So it's been frustrating to watch. And I don't have any hope that I will get any sort of justice for my situation. I'm 56. Most of the people who mess with me are dead, including my own father. And so I share my story just to be a beacon of light to anybody else who's interested in learning more about how this works. And really, my heart is with anyone who is struggling. Maybe you're feeling suicidal, depressed, but you don't know why. And you suspect that you are maybe a victim of some of this stuff. I hope that something I share in this next few minutes will be helpful to you, because you are the one I'm the most concerned about. In the eternities, we will get perfect justice at the judgment bar of God, when all things will be revealed and Heavenly Father will dole out his punishment. And so I'm looking forward to that. But wouldn't it be great if we had a little bit of justice here in our earthly courts? That would be a big win for everybody who's been a victim of this. So just a quick version of my story. And there's a podcast I did on my Substack, which described, and I'll put a link to it in my own show page around this, how I feel about being an active, faithful member of the church, despite people in the church doing these things to me. It's one of my most trafficked posts, and I think it really digs in deep to how I can be a faithful Latter-day Saint, given the experiences I had as a child. So check that out. But basically, my parents are some of those who were seduced into the cult. They were not born into it. You have this thing about, somebody's 5-6 generations of this satanic network. That wasn't my parents. They were seduced and invited to come join, and they didn't know what they were joining. And somehow they were compromised. And you're seeing this with the Jeffrey Epstein and the Diddy stories, that these networks function by getting compromising material, whether they drug you or they get you high and they get you in a video or still photo situation where they're taking pictures of you having sex with a child or doing something heinous. They get the materials to extort you, and then they've got you controlled. and this is what I believe happened to my parents. They were brought into this group of people, and they weren't just Mormons. They were all the movers and shakers in the Detroit area. And I grew up in the same stake, the Bloomfield Hills stake in Michigan, as Mitt Romney. His father was our stake president. He eventually became our patriarch. When he died, my father became the patriarch of that stake. So I'm not saying the Romneys were involved in the network. I don't know. I don't have any evidence of that. But there were people from business and sports and the arts, the education establishment, and the churches who were involved in the Satanic group. And they operated very much the way that you hear that Epstein did, Jeffrey Epstein, with just controlling people, threatening them. And then there were real punishments. People would disappear, they'd be killed. Sometimes their kids would be killed. And that always sent a chill over the whole group, like, stay in line. Don't you step out of line. If you try to, we're going to mess with you. And so I believe that's the umbrella that my parents functioned under for their whole marriage. My dad died a couple of years ago. My mom's still alive. I don't have any contact with her. Any of my 7 siblings, their spouses, nieces and nephews. I am completely outside of my family circle. And that was because of my choice. I could not rub shoulders with them saying I was tragically mentally ill. Jenny's just crazy. Especially when I started talking about the ritual stuff. So
false memories.
Yeah, exactly. My mother gave me Elizabeth Loftus' book and handed it out to the whole family. Said everybody has to read this. And this is False Memory Syndrome book written by her. She was hired by the False Memory Syndrome people to write a book explaining how it's all just these therapists implanting all these fake memories. That's the shtick. But those people are going down. Fiona Barnett in Australia was very involved in outing them as families whose own kids were outing them as pedophiles. And so they're not really functioning anymore, but the effect of that group is still with us. It's still affecting us.
Very much.
Yeah. So I was given all the programming to make me a controlled slave. That's the goal. They want you to be absolutely controlled. So I had the infant ritual.
Real quick. So you are, for those who don't know, you are talking about what I guess Goel has rightfully dubbed the LDS Church of Satan. Although it seems as though, at least through my investigation, that there are outside influence as well. And so this is a group within the church that have kind of subverted
they use their religion,
LDS leadership.
Yeah, they use their religion to cover for their Satanism. And they go looking for families to join them where it's obvious the kids are being molested by somebody. And they do that on purpose so that if anything comes out with the kid, a bad behavior, an addiction or whatever, they can point to the sexual abuse and say, oh, this kid's a victim of incest, and then they're all on board with that. Go ahead and prosecute whoever did it. And it's cover for the true crime, which is the satanic rituals that the children are being subjected to. Right. So I had all of it. I had their induction ceremony. When you're a newborn, they do this thing where these men are surrounding you and they ejaculate on the baby. That's your welcome to life, little child. We own you. I had that. I had a 4-year-old ritual when I was forced to kill a dog